Well, first of all, let's thank Dan, Sean, and Larry for putting together one hell of a conference. I know that I have enjoyed and gotten a lot of information. Thank you, Dan. And also, thank you for scheduling me right behind the Federal Reserve Bank. Because in respect to significance, I could have mailed this in because it doesn't seem that important now. My name is Nicholson. I'm with Machinery and Equipment Services, and I'm a CMEA that took the course. I've got a little different niche in that I do appraisals, but I mostly take on appraisals that try to lead into projects because I'm a contract workout guy, for lack of a better term, for small and medium-sized banks that don't have workout departments. Because I'll go in, I'll wear the suit to present to them and what I'm going to do, and then I put on the boots and go take care of the yard full of stuff that were all got shut down, and I go in and take care of it all, get it running, get it with subcontractors, and get it moved, get it stored, and then remarket it for them. So those are the appraisals I like to do. So my extensive appraisal list in the report writer is, I think it's up to a dozen in the last 3 years. So, but I get on the projects, and that's what I do. A little bit of my background is, I've been around equipment for 35 years. I was a young rental manager with a cat dealer in Houston, and then joined with a small company called Ritchie Brothers Auctioneers that was relatively unknown in America at the time. It was a small company that had about 45 employees, and I grew with that company, and I was with them for 25 years, and finished up with them when I had Central U.S. and Mexico, Central South America for sales and operations, until they got a new CEO that put Office Max and Office Depot together, and he brought in his management team, and all us field SVPs took packages and went on. So I took a year off, which was 8 months too long, and then got a call from a banker saying, "Nick, I need some help with this package," and so I took care of everything for him, and he had a friend, did it again. I said, well, let's just start a business and do this. So that's how I kind of got started in it, but I'm not an expert. The construction equipment, there's a lot of it. You know, that you can't be an expert in all of it for sure. And although I've probably appraised over $4 billion worth of construction equipment and transportation equipment, most of that just pricing, not the data collection. Probably $1 billion worth of data collection, but mostly pricing. But really the most valuable thing through that entire experience was most of what we appraised went to market and went to auction, sold on average in 45 days, which was an amazing opportunity to be hyper-focused on calibrating your pricing, because you get immediate feedback as to what something's worth. And one of the most important facets of it was, come sale day, you've got 48 to 50 states represented with buyers, and maybe 30 to 50 countries from all over. And it's really a form of OLV because it's mostly retail end user buyers without warranty, without backup, as is, but they're end user buyers. But the best value I got was walking around during sale day or before sale and going up and walking to them while the real buyers look at a machine, say, "What are you looking at on this one?" You know, and just acting dumb and just absorb everything they say, and they will tell you everything that's important to them, and all the things you might have been taught was important isn't worth nothing. You know, it doesn't matter to them. So if it doesn't matter to the buyer, it doesn't matter on value. So when Dan asked me to do this presentation on construction, I thought, on the last year I did one on transportation, just wanted to, and some guys said, "Hey, I still use your thing that, or your data that you gave us as a guide." And I thought, all right, well, what can I deliver? I can't teach you all about construction equipment appraising. We typically take 2-3 years with a lot of guys helping young guys to learn this stuff. But if I could leave you with a guide of something that you can use to make yourself better at appraising, make yourself more credible to the bank, to the lending institution maybe that hired you, or the fleet owner that hired you, and maybe equally as important, as credible to the bank's customer, because he's given him the appraisal and, hey, this is what it came out to, and they will be able to tell. If you follow some of the basic guides, they'll know he knows something about construction equipment because he listed all the important stuff. So it gives you credibility with the bank's customer, which gives you credibility with the bank. So that's what I tried to do. So this PowerPoint is jammed with all kinds of data and stuff that I will not read today, luckily, because I'd need about several hours for that. But you'll be able to take it off of the NEBB website when you're getting into a construction equipment appraisal, and you'll remember some of the points I talked about. I'm going to talk generally, kind of point out, and I've illustrated with pictures of the type of options that affect values in construction equipment, so you'll have a mental reference to it, and then you go back and just use the PowerPoint as kind of like a little book with a picture. I'm just going to talk about some of the basic equipment. So I listed all this stuff. A couple of them I won't get into, but it's just basically to point out some items on this type of equipment. First of all, to get started, I'm gonna kind of rip through, because I did my first run through night before last when I got into the hotel, and this presentation only lasted 2.5 hours, because I like to tell a lot of stories because it illustrates and cements in images into the mind. But so I'm just going to kind of rip through it and tell a few stories. So just some things that you want to take with you. Well, before we get into these appraisal tips and just the list of stuff you use, some of the stuff that I do, and it was touched on yesterday, in when you're getting into equipment appraisals, or really whatever asset base you're getting into, what I found was the most effective things for getting relationships with banks and then getting all their business is I identified my market, which I thought was small to medium-sized banks that didn't have workout departments that those guys already have relationships with. But I found, well, this should be easy because I can fill a need here. Well, it wasn't easy, because those small banks, those portfolio managers, there might be a dozen to 30 in a small to medium-sized bank, and getting to every one of them, you can't do it. And when you do pick out some of them, if they don't have an immediate need of something, they're very polite and say, thank you, I'll pick, and they're gone. They'll never need that for my little niche. So what I found is I got to the president of the bank, because it's a small to medium-sized bank, you can get in there, get to him and then find out what they need. So you have your monthly meeting, and one of the guys said, hey, he brings in breakfast if I can talk 15 minutes. I try to give him something of value. I started actually within the company what was called a financial workshop, where we basically invite bankers for a little lunch, and we're going to educate them on equipment and equipment values, which you can't educate people on equipment values in an hour and a half. So we basically told them what they didn't know and the fear of what you don't know. So I talked to the bank president and said, you know, you're lending on an equipment list that has a make, model, serial number, because that's what you can use to file the UCC-1 for them to get the lien when they lend money on it. That's all they've got. So I point out to him the risks to the bank, that you can have a $40,000 ripper on the back of this tractor. You know what? That's not on your equipment list. Savvy, you know, if people's going out to get you, they'll get you. So if things are going bad, they can keep the ripper. You'd never know anything about it. You got less value. There's all kinds of things, and an undercarriage that might be $20,000, and you think, well, my serial number's worth X. It varies, and your people need to know it. Can I come in and just give them a 15-minute, 20-minute education on what they should be afraid of? Oh, yeah, I want to do that. I'm looking for reasons to make my monthly meetings more interesting for these guys anyway. And you know what? Every time I've been able to get into one of those, I am the guy for the bank, and anything that pops up. It establishes a relationship, because now those guys visibly associate you with somebody who's going to give them the straight scoop and a service provider for their benefit. So that was just a little tip on the marketing. The rest of my marketing has been grossly ineffective since I don't have a lot of those guys. So I won't even talk about that because I'm just not that good at it. But Nathan and I are talking. You've got the CMEA handbook, which tells you all these things that you can have for the to take with your appraisal. That's handy to have. On construction, these are basically the things I have. I'll take the data sheets. You know, they got these 8.5 by 11 data sheets. I'll cut them in half, copy it, and make it 2 to a page, and cut them. And those are my data sheets, or just index cards. And the benefit to that is you can sort them before you enter them in. You can really sort them on a spreadsheet too, but I kind of sort them before I enter them in. I scratch up, write up this piece of equipment, and I throw it in the thing, and then I go on to the next one. And before I enter it all in, I'll put them in the order that I want to, that's logical. So you got similar items for pricing purposes and for logic for the customer. I mentioned it one, and I don't know who all was in here, but when I'm taking pictures, I got this fancy camera that burned a number into it, and I advance the number and take the picture, and I write that number on the card. So I got multiples of a unit. I don't know which one I pictured. I think in the old videos, you take a number card and set it on the undercarriage or whatever, but you can today you can just burn it into it. Now I just use the iPhone, and I just have it show the date or the time on the iPhone picture. So whatever time it is I'm shooting at, I look down on it, see it, and I write that time on the card, and I've got a corresponding number to the card. Tape measure, you're always measuring something on it because of different options, different sizes. Cleaning rag just for plates and such. A small scraper when the data plates are all really covered in mud, because this is working with mud construction equipment, so you need to be able to clean it off. Sometimes when you got a really clean or really new data plate, you can hardly read it, and it doesn't even come out on my picture either. So I'll take grease or dirt or something and wipe into that plate real good, and then I'll wipe the plate off, which just puts the dirt into the grooves, and then I can read everything a hell of a lot easier because I'm 57 years old and I can't see that good without the glasses, and it doesn't come out on the picture. And water. Some of the greatest impacts on equipment values is starting with the hours on a machine. All machines have a form of an hour meter, or it might even say SMH, which is service meter hour. And for many different reasons, because that really tells you almost the life of the machine, and how much it's been working, not only for maintenance purposes, but for component replacement and such. So that's pretty important. Now, the newer machines pretty much most of them have digital readouts on them, but most machines also have a mechanical hour meter, and they go bad. You don't know really what the hours are on these machines. Most of the time they're pretty accurate, but just like trucks, or your vehicle, you can plug into the computer and tell how many real hours they are. I can't afford everybody's computer that these dealers walk around in, so anytime they're out on the site, or if I see a dealer, I ask them to plug them in, tell me that's right, especially in my business, because sometimes I'm buying and selling. Not on the job, though, because I stay unbiased. But the hours are very important. So you want to make sure that you get at least a good hour meter reading. Now, as you get experience with it, so it's kind of tough. If you know they're wrong, you've got a 1978 D5B crawler tractor, and it says 3580 hours, you know that's not right. So I put an asterisk in my spreadsheet on it, because when I come down to getting into the report later, I form my spreadsheet now to fit exactly for the columns where it will fit into the capital equipment section of the report writer report that I've already converted to Word, and it fits better. But anyway, hours you put an asterisk if if you don't believe it. In the report, I always put down at the bottom in that little section that has some disclaimers in it, I will put a disclaimer in there. Hour readings may not be accurate. Every auction company does that too, because nobody wants to be held liable to that. But in our case, we're formulating values somewhat based on these hours. So it's more significant with construction equipment. The condition of equipment is obviously important, and when you're looking at applications, you know, if you're talking about that highway contractor that's out here building the interstate, and that equipment's out there running back and forth, that's maybe where it spends its whole life, is on highway jobs, versus a clearing application where he has these 5 acres and has to wipe it all out. Very tough application. The equipment's always in rougher condition. Scrap applications, you're always swinging metal in, or you're driving over metal pieces and it gets into the machine, and those are tough applications which affect the condition of the machine. And we'll get into more detail too about some of the conditions that are visible to the eye that have significant effect on value. Year models. Year models are obviously important if this one's newer, this one's older, but it's not as important as it would be, say, for your vehicle. You know, you're talking about 2015 to 2012, you can almost chart that with your pickup truck. With equipment, it has an impact, but much less. For example, I don't know how many times we've seen on the ramp where you've got same machine, and I gotta qualify this because there's series of machines. Same machine, same series, same operator even, sitting side by side. One of them's a 2015 with 4,500 hours use on it. And you've got right behind it a 2012, and but it really only has 2,000 hours. That 2012 will outsell that 2015. That's how significant the hours are, the more significant than the year. But when I say, when you do those comparisons and you're doing research, all this will tie to not only your credibility for the report and the sales value you're given to the banker. I'm not only just going to give you what information you have and a number, I'm going to give you a write-up on your assets that you have as collateral, to the extent you could market them exactly how I'm going to write them, should it come to that one day.
When you're measuring against the year, do you have a mental year that you cut for where they put your emissions on it, and that changes the value maybe positively if it's a year older because of not having all the weird emissions on it?
It's a very good question, because at one point we did. When you got into the emissions and you had to have the fume burners and what, like on the trucks you see the DEF and all that. When we were going through that period of time through the 2000s and then late 2000s and the earlier part of this decade, you saw a price increase on those older machines just before you got to the emissions. But now time has passed, and now here we are through another decade and into 2019. That's less significant because the pre-emission stuff is pretty old now, right? So
That's still true though on the smaller stuff.
yeah, I don't. You know, I don't know, just because I'd probably research that more. I haven't done much of the small stuff, so not on the yellow iron and not on the big stuff. It was significant at one time. It's less so now because it's pretty old. Because that was through the 90s. You're talking about the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. You get into California, that was absolutely significant because that is one crazy state. You know, they will regulate you right out, but somebody's got to build it so that some stay and do it. I don't know. Equipped with which features? That's what most of this PowerPoint is really directed to, filling in the blanks of, hey, what are the features and what could affect it? Not only for your own, to make you look good and to give them good information, but a little bit about how they might affect value. So we'll jump in. There's a lot more writing, and I just put pictures of stuff that corresponds, and as we get into the heavier stuff, I'm not going to list it, but I'll start off in the beginning so you kind of get the gist of what I'm doing. Just on aerial equipment, for example, you've got, it's called a boom lift. In fact, some of the older guys, you're going to hear slang out there when you're talking to equipment managers and owners. Well, that's my man lift. And in fact, the manufacturers used to call them man lifts, but that lift's a man too, so they just all started distinguishing between them. That's a boom lift. So if your guy says man lift, you know what this is. It's the same thing he's talking about. Boom lift, that's a straight boom, as you can see. This is an articulated boom. Genie's one of the big manufacturers too. They're the blue ones. They call theirs a Z boom, but it's all an articulated boom. It's an articulated boom lift. Some of the functions, there's not a lot of different options you can get on them, but some will have most will have 4x4. Some actually don't have 4x4, and the price differential is quite significant. Not so much because of the new price of the machine is the only correlation. It's because if you've ever been on a job site and you've had to move your boom lift around to the other side of the building to get to it, and you just got this little puddle there and you got a two-wheel drive, you get stuck in it because it just won't get through. So people just don't want them that much, and I think they're making less of them now. But as you get into older stuff, you're gonna come across them. 4x4 rotating basket where you can move it and adjust it. A jib, which is this thing right here, is on the end of the boom and gives you more flexibility when you're out there. That is an option on machines. The boom length, which most of the times in a boom lift, it's in the model number, like this Genie S60. You can just about guess that goes 60 foot. So you get some of that. And the engine would be more significant because on these you could have a gas engine, LP, it'll have the liquid propane tank on the back, or diesel, and the smaller ones, all electric. So the power of it would be significant. Scissor lifts, about the same thing. You can have just a regular scissor lift. It'll have cushioned tires down here, so it's mostly for warehouse work, and so much so that in the models of all these, it'll tell you what the width is and the platform height is. For example, this one's a 2632. It'll go 26 foot and it's 32 wide. And they want to know how wide it is because this is going to go up and down my aisles of my warehouse. Or rough terrain forklifts, which will typically be like a four-wheel drive, and it just gets around. It's more for outdoors, so you can distinguish just between scissor lift and rough terrain scissor lift. But platform, I said all that. 4x4 engine or electric, and what kind of engine it is. Now, if I get to something that you really wonder about, stop me and we'll talk about it, and I'll just try not to get too passionate about it because I love this stuff. I find it fascinating, and you might run into it sometimes. Aggregate equipment. Aggregate equipment is kind of tough. Well, crushers are kind of tough. That's why I skipped right past it. No. Crushers are kind of tough because really when you're looking at condition on crushers, you really have to remove all the owner will know this. Everything I'm talking about, the owner will know, so if you throw out little bits, you'll gain credibility with them and reporting back to your customer, the bank. But crushers, to really know condition, you got to pull off a lot of inspection plates to get in. Like this is a cutaway version of a jaw. There's a variety of crushers. It's probably the most common that you see. And a jaw will have a big wheel on the side of it with basically drive belts, like fan belts, hooked to a motor that turns this big wheel, and it makes this jaw go like that. Okay, and that's what crushes the stone. And there'll be a size, like what the opening is, width, and what it'll crush to. So that goes back and forth. So that's a cutaway version of what that looks like. And then a cone. A cone crusher looks like a big barrel. It's lined with manganese wear surface, so that's a good hard wear surface. And what it is a barrel on the inside with a cone up through the middle of it, and it gyrates through the inside, crushing the stone. When you see one, you can't help but tell it's a cone crusher. And over here, I just put an impact crusher, which you kind of see how it works. You throw it down, the material comes in, and these big bars throw it against a wear plate here, and breaks the material. Sometimes you might hear they might designate them as primary crusher and secondary crusher. Really, that's just the application, because the bigger stuff might be a bigger jaw, and they're putting bigger material down in there. It crushes it, and then it comes out into a conveyor, into a secondary, smaller crusher, taking it down to a smaller size so you can get it to a screen. So what happens is when you're writing up screens, like this is a vibratory incline screen. You can see the little motors here, and they're a little concentric offset, so it shakes the screen. So the material will come down in a whole lot of crushers down to here, which is basically the top. It's like a scalping screen. Scalps off the biggest stuff, and then a conveyor takes it off, maybe back into the a smaller crusher that takes it smaller. Everything that falls through that goes to this screen, and what gets hung up is that size of aggregate, right, between the diameter of that, and a conveyor takes it off and puts it into a pile. So they've got whatever it is, 1.5 inch to 2 3/4 inch size stones in this pile, and what falls through these holes in this screen goes to that, and that'll be a different size, right? And the conveyor takes it off. So that's how they separate the sizes of aggregate that go through. And then what falls through the bottom will be more the fines. So you have conveyors taking them out of these and separating them into different piles, so you have different sized aggregate. I just took a picture of well, that looks pretty to you, but it's really just a screening plant, which is an integrated system around screens with conveyors hooked to them, and they're a lot easier and faster to set up, but they're less configurable than if somebody started from scratch that's going to be on a job a long time. They set up everything with the screens and the conveyors and the stockpiles. A variety of conveyors. This is an overland. Most are just channel conveyors or feed conveyors, same thing. This was a picture of an overland conveyor, because you see they poured concrete and they set it up, and that's for a long distance where they're bringing material, regular feeding to something. So that'll be an overland, and then a channel's just a standard small feed conveyor, or a portable conveyor. Looks kind of like that, but it's just got 2 wheels, and you can pick it up and take it where you need to go, as opposed to its richer brother here, the radial stacker, which those wheels, you'll notice, they can turn. They can turn, and they'll generally have some motors on them, so that as the radial stacker is working, it slowly moves side to side by itself, and it gives you a radial pile of aggregate. That's just a little overview. Conveyors. Conveyors, all these will have some sort of power, and it's usually a diesel engine or a big electric motor. You note what that is too, because if you're reselling it, they want to know what it's powered by. Lots of information, but you could this is just, oh, I'm ripping. Just a basic compactor. This is like an 815. Cat makes an 815, 825. Ham makes one, but it basically just rolls over the dirt. Most all will have what's called a leveling blade, or slang for it'll be knockdown blade. And when you're out on the job and dirt's all piled up, but it's not fine graded because you're running a rough compactor over that, you can have the leveling blade or knockdown blade knock down stuff in advance of you before you roll over it and compact it. This type of compactor works. I took a close-up of the the pads, because that's a percentage of wear that you can see. Most of them have it like that, because you truly get compaction. It's not just rolling over it. Like if you increase the PSI, so if you're taking your cup of your hand and you're throwing on there, you're getting more PSI than if you're just doing that, right? So that's the concept of those. I didn't engineer that. I just know that that's what we do. But as you see those little pockets disappear because the metal's wearing down, the feet might be shot. Well, you might be talking $10,000 or $12,000 to change the feet on an 815. So that's why that part's significant. If you see a nice deep cut like that, it might go about that deep. If it's a nice big cup, you know, they might be 70, 80%, and no one will test you.
You know something else? I saw a lot of those that come out of landfills, and when you speak about condition, you know, you have to be careful with those coming out of landfills. They're corroded underneath, and lots of issues, and similar with coming out of an agricultural, you know, a dairy farm.
A dairy farmer fertilizer, and you got to look for that. Down here we get rust, and people don't think too much of it, but those Midwestern buyers, they don't like that rust at all, so they actually discount for that. But to Tom's point, and Tom's had a lot of auction experience, so he's familiar with it. I wanted to put a landfill compactor up there because a landfill compactor looks just like that, but the wheels are designed for chopping. And if you look at the wheel, if you're just looking down on the top of the wheel here, you're going to see this with choppers basically. From the side, it looks like that. And that's called a landfill compactor. It's not designed to get PSI compaction on the dirt. It's chopping up the stuff. And I almost got run off in my first year at Ritchie Brothers in the late 80s because I was trying to start off and no one had even heard of Ritchie Brothers, so I'm trying to get people to consign to my auction, and I'd get some really rough junk in there. But I could get what I could get, and I got this landfill compactor, and I said, and the mechanics, we had it delivered, and the mechanics were back there, and I said, can we get all this crap out of here, though? You know, all the stuff, all the metal and stuff in there, and they almost walked from the job, which got me and a whole bunch of heat. He says, Nick, there's syringes in there, there's everything in there. He said, we're going to die if we try to clean this up like you want to clean it up. We're out of here. But you're right, it is bad, and it's expensive to clean out because who the hell wants to do that, really? Then you got a little, and the manufacturers have kind of migrated this, and I'm glad they have. Vibratory pad foot compactor. You notice it's a single drum with pads, so with feet, as opposed to these rollers that are smooth drum. There never used to be that verbiage to separate them. When I started in the business, this was a vibratory smooth drum compactor, but now they just call it roller, which signifies it's smooth drum. You know, you can take out two words. But anyway, on a vibratory pad foot compactor, that is an option. They don't all have that. In fact, most don't have that, the leveling blade. So that you'll for sure want to list. I list this anyway in my appraisal, even though it's not an option, because it might have tilt. That is called a tilt cylinder, so that when you're out there driving and knocking down piles, you have the flexibility of actually shaping it a little. And that's a tilt cylinder that tilts that blade. We'll get a little bit, there's some more examples of that. And both of these have a tilt cylinder. So the main things on these is leveling blade, if it has tilt, if it has a leveling blade, if it has tilt. The drum width, most of the models are all the same drum width, but some folks don't know the model numbers, so drum width helps them say that's an 84-inch pad foot compactor, or a 66, or a 54, or a 42. Whether it has a cab or canopy is important, and what engine it might, because some manufacturers put choices of engines, whether it be Cummins or Perkins or whatever it might be. When you're looking for wear on these, it's really not much. There is one point. This used to be significant, but most of them are doing it now. There was I think it was mostly on smooth drums, but you see the hydraulic lines going into right here. Well, how a vibratory compactor works, it'll shake you up because it's off balance concentric spinner inside of that drum, which shakes it and it gives you a higher dynamic force. This machine might weigh 30,000, 25,000 pounds, but you get a 50,000 pound dynamic force because of this function. Well, that'll be a hydraulic motor driving that. Well, if there's another motor on the other side, that means it has drum drive, because these wheels drive, and it used to be you could, that's what would drive the compactor, and the drum would just roll on along with it. And then it was an option to have drum drive also, so the drum actually powered you through and you didn't get stuck very much. I think most all of them are, on the newer ones, are putting drum drive, but you get in some old stuff, you might have a hydraulic pump with lines going to it only on one side of the drum. If it don't have it on the other, I might note it doesn't have drum drive, because when I'm pricing it, I'm going to discount it. Vibratory roller, basically the same stuff. Sometimes they'll have a water system on it, because they might even do it on the rough pass for an asphalt, or they just want to, and it keeps the drum clean, right? So nothing sticks to it. But mostly these are the asphalt rollers, but we'll get to that. But they're basically the same write-ups as that. They just don't have pad foots.
Nick, do you look for flat spots or concave on those flat drums?
Yeah, I don't see them. I don't see them too much. I haven't really pointed it out to be a big detriment. But you remind me of a point. There's also something called a shell kit you may run into. On these smooth drums, you can buy a shell kit, which is basically that fits over the drum in two pieces. They bolt it up, and then you've got a pad foot. Those are about probably $3 to $5 grand, would you say, if you were going to say a shell kit that would add to that machine. In fact, you could sell it separately for that, $3 to $5 grand. It's called a shell kit, and you bolt it onto this machine, and you basically have two machines in one with a little labor. Yeah, other than the leaks, I don't really discount unless it's really got the leaks. If you have a leak, oil leak around these drum drives and these compaction pumps, it's expensive. In fact, I deduct it heavily, because whoever's looking to buy that machine, they're going to drop some money into fixing that thing. And sometimes that's when people are just dumping them off, and they go to Mexico or they go where else they got cheaper labor, and they go to fixing them and fix them however they can. But when you start to see these pumps leaking, there's a significant repair bill due. I used to know how much it was, but I want to say it's $8-10 grand, but maybe that's a little high. I can't remember. It's been a while. Double drum vibratory roller, some call them tandem vibratory roller. You're never wrong with either one. It doesn't matter. They're synonymous. Mostly all for asphalt. Sometimes they use them on dirt, but they're mostly for asphalt, and they usually will have a water system on it. I just list drum with water system, cab. That's about it. Pneumatic rollers, that is a pneumatic roller. You're just rolling on tires. It'll always be an odd number of tires, because as you're making a pass, there's going to be a gap between the tires, and the back axle fills in that gap. So that's why they're odd number of tires. You have 11 wheel, 9 wheel, 7 wheel. So what I'd call it is, and I don't know what that one is, maybe, it says a Sakai, whatever the model is, 9 wheel pneumatic roller. That's what I'd call that. And some have a water system, but really all you're just saying is what the only option on it, well, what engine you got. There's not really much to them. Sometimes they might have a cab or a canopy, and you list that. I don't list ROPS on anything, and that's just my auction training, just because ROPS stands for Rollover Protective Structure. And OSHA is tested that if that thing rolled over, it's going to support the weight of the machine, and maybe the guy won't get killed. Maybe, because usually you're getting killed if you're rolling them. But no, who could certify if it's a ROPS? And we didn't want to get into that, and you don't want to get into that. So, well, it's the same. No, I call it cab or canopy. Generic generic, and that's all that cares to the buyer or to the value of it, he's assuming it's ROPS, and no one's going to be saying, hey, that's not ROPS. It is what it is. I didn't say it was ROPS, but they're all pretty much ROPS, but you could get some crap stuff in where it's not truly a ROPS, but you don't see it too much.
On some of these kind of things here, I mean, we were saying that have a variety of different engines they can have in them. So as an appraiser, do you go out there and you put it up and take a look at
Yeah, all of them have an access door to where you can look at because you can always look into the engine. You don't have to take an inspection panel off of that because you have to access it to check the oil every single day if you're operating it to add oil to antifreeze, whatever it may be. So it'll always have a door you can access the engine, and you just see, and the engine will usually have a tag on it on the Cummins. It's along the front side of it. It's a big long one. It'll say Cummins. It'll say what model it is, and that's all I list. Yeah, I just say Cummins 6.7 QSB. That's because that's what it says on the tag, and really any buyer distinguishing that would be looking for it later, it's got a Cummins. That's what he'd think of it. I'm sorry, what was the question? Probably not that much, is there? When you're it's really a buyer preference.
Who are their mechanics servicing? They have Perkins or Cummins or
Yeah, yeah. If you've got a lot of buyers, it's not going to matter because some guys like Chevy, some guys like Ford. So he likes Cummins or Perkins. Not a swing in price, no. Yeah, so I guess for the appraisal purposes, it's not that significant. So if you don't get it, it's not significant.
Just adds credibility to your work.
Yeah.
So I just ask the service guy that's taking me around, I usually ask him what kind of engine you got.
Yeah, then you don't have to look at it all because unless it's pissing out oil, which you're going to see beneath the machine, you don't need to get in there.
Most of the guys are usually going to tell you too.
Oh yeah.
My experience, they say, yeah, this was a crap one. We have all kinds of problems with it, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it was talked about a little bit yesterday, and I like that topic. He said the owner loves to. We always teach the owner loves to talk about his stuff, so get him talking. The equipment manager, you can actually verbalize just a little bit differently. Man, are these high maintenance? Because he's going to whine about something. So tap into something he's going to whine on. These are pretty high maintenance, huh? He says, no, it's bad. If he had to do much to it, that's the trigger that starts him telling you what he has done, and what he needs to do. If you start off with, is there anything wrong with this I should know about? He's a little more guarded. You get him talking about the equipment, and then the rest of the time you're getting all kinds of good info. Cranes, crawler cranes are. It's a specialty, and it's quite significant. Unless you're not going to be an expert in crawler cranes, and I'm sure not. But I list out what the major components are that you'll be looking for, and for your download or whatever if you ever need it on the website, you'll have what the correct terminology is for a crane right here, which shows all the components. The main ones, hook block, which that you've got 3, 5, 7 shiv hook blocks that'll have a capacity. Hook ball is usually for the auxiliary line, or fast line they might call it, which is the second winch the second line that you might be handling something with on a crane. But you'll have a jib mast holding it away, and you'll want to know what kind of boom. If you're marketing, they'll want to know what kind of boom tip you have. I mean, there's a lot of details with crawler cranes, but I'm just going to kind of give you an overview. But the length of boom and what kind of boom. It might be a tubular boom or angle boom, and you can ask whoever you're there with, what type of boom is that and how much have you got? And they will know because they specify what kind of boom. Number 32 tube boom is significant to a buyer. Does it matter that much on the price? Probably not, because it's an application for this or that, or one's more expensive, but I'm not sure. But it's very, cranes can be sophisticated, but you'll get all kinds. Like the older ones were all friction cranes, where when you get up in the cab, you're sitting right next to all what the drawworks is, and they're big wheels and gears and looks like brake pads holding on, and you got clutches, and you put it into gear, and that's how you're operating on. It's getting harder and harder to find those operators, and especially for like drag lines, where those drag lines are called duty cycle. They look exactly the same damn near. A couple little things. You might have a third drum, and you'll see a little roll-up thing on the front because you're casting out the bucket and then dragging it to you, lifting up and dumping somewhere. That's a drag line. Those are going away, and excavators and long-reach excavators are replacing them, and you can't hardly find operators for them. That's the first thing when you come across them. Say, hey, you get many operators for these? You can't find an operator, and he loves talking to you somewhere. Then those are called duty cycle machines, and they're always worth less, because they wear, instead of a crane just sitting here doing a couple picks, that is working hard, you know. They wear out. That's drag lines, but it sure looks like a crane. Then you got rough terrain cranes, look like that. And they basically all look the same and do the same thing. You'll have a hook block, and you might have a hook ball, depending on, and I left it off there, depending on whether you have an auxiliary winch, which is a major option, and that will add value, which is a second winch. If you see back here, there's the winch that comes up here to the line, and then you'll have a hook block that you lift stuff with. You'll have 2 winches back here, which means you probably have on this end a hook block and a hook ball. But that auxiliary winch you definitely want to list, even though I didn't put it on there. I'll get Larry to change it, and then when it goes up on the website. This is a jib. They're usually swing away, or sometimes they call them stowaway. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes they flip up from the bottom, but most of them come from the side. They'll unpin it there. Well, they'll lay it down, unpin it, and then swing it out, and then you've got some extra length on your boom, as well as you can have a hook block coming from the end of the boom here, and then have another fast line to depending on whatever you're lifting, to hook onto it as well for stabilization. And it's faster. So that's the jib. So you get the jib length as well, and most of that will be up in the cab. And cranes are supposed to have load charts, all of them required, assigned to that serial number. The older ones just might have a chart, a metal chart up into the cab, but you can get most of the information off that data in the cab. So it'll tell you what the length of the boom is. You just look at the longest number it's got there, and okay, it's an 80-foot boom. But that'll tell you what all that is, as well as the length of the jib if it's got a jib. Some little things that you see, they're pretty much standard on machines. You can't really see it in that picture. On this hook block, on this line, you'll see a little ring of metal tied to a cable and up to a little lever. That's called an anti-two block. When I did my first appraisal, I had the owner telling me what it was, and I turned it in to Eddie, the partner of the company, for my appraisal. And he called laughing at me because I called it an anti-tube lock. So I didn't know what the hell it was anyway. That's what the owner told me it was. But it's two block. It keeps your hook block from coming up, and you tighten it too high, too much, ruining your cable, potentially damaging the crane because you took it up and sucked it up too hard. So what it does is when that hook block hits that little ring, trips a lever, and then it kicks the hydraulics out, so you can't bind it up. That's anti-two block. LMI, you'll see it you won't be able to really tell on the boom, but you see it in the cab, and you'll see a electronic readout, and that's called load moment indicator. So that's what will tell you how much weight you have on the hook. A lot of cranes don't have them, so it's an option to have, which is nice to have. I know how much weight I'm lifting on this hook, so for the capacity purposes of whatever you're doing and how far out you are. Yeah. The capacities, it's this might be a 50-ton rough terrain crane. Well, that's 50 ton with the boom sitting just like that and the load sitting right in front of it. The further out you are or over the side, the capacities drop, and there's a load chart in there that tells you, hey, this far up or this far out, this is the capacity, this is the capacity. So they all have outriggers too. I didn't note them, but those are hydraulic outriggers that will go outside the machine and then down so that it stabilizes the machine and gets it off its rubber wheels so you can safely lift the load. These are called carry deck cranes.
Nick, real quick, on your hydraulic cranes, do you give different value if it's certified or not?
I used to, but it seems like the buyers ask less for it. Because one thing I did learn on certifications, the way the requirements are on certified, now this does not apply to California because everything's all different in California. But everywhere else, the certification can be performed by a qualified inspector. You've heard that term before. That is a crane inspector, which is mind-boggling to me because you're talking about suspending weight up in the air above people.
How much traction do you give if there's any kind of issues with the boom?
Well, you wouldn't probably be able to see it unless you saw a lot of oil in here, and if you do, you've got to detract. I should have gone into that. Yeah, if you've got a nick on a boom, if you see where paint has been scratched off and something's hit it, you got to discount for that because those crane booms have to be inspected. They do have to be inspected because nobody will take one on a job because these are lifting high and heavy, and nobody will take it on a job without an inspected boom crane. But on rough terrains,
Whoever buys it is going to go through an inspection pretty much right away anyways. So.
Yeah, because they'll have to. Yeah, if you're going into a plant and you're going to do some lifting, or depending on what kind of job it is, the owner will have requirements of what they may have or they don't care. If it's, you're building a little strip mall out in a rural area, you might not really care, but you get downtown, city might have really tough requirements. But if I saw leaks in and around this boom section, you got to figure those are big hydraulic cylinders taking each of these stages out. And it ain't easy to get in there and get those things rebuilt. So you don't ever like leaks on a crane and discount because you're not, just the income opportunity is less because there's a lot of jobs that can't go on to if it's leaking. This is a carry deck, which is basically a little crane. You can have an 8.5 ton, 10 ton, 12 ton, 15 ton, 20 ton carry deck cranes. And why they call it that is because you can lift, set whatever steel or pipe or whatever you're doing on the top of this deck, carry it over the other side of the job, lift it off and go. And that's why they call it a carry deck crane. Not too much with them. Mostly they're Grove or Broderson. Some other folks are starting to jump into them, but those have been pretty much the only two players the last 20 years, 30 years. Some of them might have a jib, cab, or canopy. Some have a front winch right here just above where that's hooking, and what kind of engine it might have, and you're safe there, and then you can go do your research on values. This is an all-terrain crane versus a truck crane. Some folks don't know the difference. On a truck crane, the tires on the wheels look just like a highway truck. They're narrow and they look exactly like a highway truck. On these all-terrains, they're going to be a lot bigger. They're going to look more like heavy-duty or light-duty construction wheel tires, and it's going to have different suspensions so they can get off-road and onto the job and do whatever lifting you might have. Most of the write-up, because if you look at this top, is really just the same as what you have on a rough terrain crane, with exception of the carrier. And there's a lot of mystery around these carriers because you want to know, well, how many drive, they want to know what configuration it is. So basically, I don't know if I really explained it thoroughly on here. This might be a 10 by 6 by 10 carrier. What the heck does that mean? Well, in this case, divide them all by 2, 5 by 3 by 5. It means it's got 5 axles total, 6 of them are, or 3 of them are drive axles. So 1, 2, 3, and you get up under there and look, and you'll see the drive shaft. These axles will drive it. And today you can have all can steer. It wasn't that long ago you really only had the front 1 or 2 or maybe 3 axles would steer and the rears wouldn't. Well, technology changes and now you can have all of them steer. But so when you're writing it up, just do it backwards. You know, hey, how many axles do I have? I got 7 axles. So that first number is going to be 14. Just multiply it times 2. And you will be, that's the way the industry describes it. I didn't make this up, not just a cool way to do it, but the industry describes truck cranes this way. Does that make sense? That's kind of weird, but that's the way it is. A gantry crane, everybody's seen one of those. Capacity, dimension, motor, hook block. I don't do a lot of gantry cranes, so I don't know what the big specifics are on them. I just know they're expensive to take down and then put back up. So are they going to be that expensive? Standard stuff, crawler loaders. I just put these in here to show you some options. You basically list the kind of bucket. It might have auxiliary hydraulics, which might be a hydraulic line along these, I don't see it on this, a hydraulic line along the side of it so that you can hook something else up that would have another hydraulic circuit to operate. But this has a 4-in-1 bucket or multi-purpose bucket, same thing. But what basically is this, see that seam right there? So that bucket, front of that bucket will lift up, revealing what you could maybe have a small dozer blade just to knock some stuff down, or to pinch something heavy, pick it up, and carry it over to this other side of the job. And that's why they call it a multi-function job, or a multi-function bucket, or 4-in-1 bucket. Why was it 4-in-1? I could see how it's a bucket, a dozer, a clamp. What's the fourth? What's that?
The dump.
Yeah, well, I thought a regular bucket would be a dump. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe. Okay. Well, so that's what that is. That's a 4-in-1 bucket. Everybody will know what you're talking about. Winch or ripper. This one particularly has a winch. If it's got some information, write some information down on the winch. The bank will love you because that's one of the attachments he doesn't have on his asset list. That's a ripper designed to tear up really hard ground that they're having trouble getting through so that they can scoop it up. You'll just see a lot of those. Cab and canopy, important. Yes. Yeah, they'll sell it with attachment on. Only Edmonton, Alberta, because they think they run the entire oil world, will sell them separately, and they get Orlando to do it too. But most always it's sold with it, especially with the big dozers too, because a D10, like here's a crawler tractor that's like a D6 size. You get into a D10 or a D11, it will have a ripper. Because and that might be $100,000 item, but you just don't see them without. And if you saw it, and that banker surely doesn't have it on his list. Yeah, well, coal and big and out west, a lot of them.
More importantly, the better way to look at that is if you're seeing a listing on like Machinio or somebody like that who is a Canadian base, then that's why they're stripped off of theirs. Because a lot of times
Well, I say stripped off. It's stripped off on when you're selling it by auction because they think they're going to net more money if they sell the item separate, because you're almost backing the guy into it. First you sell the tractor and he wants that ripper, so he's forced to bid that ripper up to somebody else, and you're setting the stage for someone else to screw him and push his price up, right? But that's the goal of the auction, is to get the highest price, right?
You know, I'll tell you, I sold in the West Coast, we saw very few crawler implements come through, whether it's a motor grader, tractor, what have you, without a ripper. You go to Florida, nobody has them. They're all what you call bareback.
right, that's
You'll
why
never see one.
on the list.
Because it's sandy ground versus rocky ground.
So when you get to a harder, you'll see them on every tractor. And if you see one without one, you've got to say, what was that application? So if you get a bareback in the western U.S., well, just why didn't it have a ripper? or did it and they took it.
But it might mean that your blade is in better condition if you see one dirt back, because you might be pushing low moly or something, right?
Well, it won't be a typical job site, so that's why Tom says that might be a question to ask. I don't have any time. There's no clock around here, do I?
11:30. I can give you time going down. If you
I
want.
got 30 minutes, okay? Because we can get to telling stories just because we love this stuff, right? So, on a crawler tractor, crawler is self-evident. Type of blade, whether it has a tilt cylinder that allows you to do that, cab, winch, or ripper, just like this. I put some varieties of blades, just so you know. Dozer blades. This is an example of a semi-U or an SU dozer. Notice the ends are angled out a little bit. Well, when you got a full blade of dirt and you're pushing, you can get about 25% more dirt just because you have a semi-U. You can load that blade up more, as opposed to a straight blade which has no turn in at all. So when you're describing it, I go front to back on my equipment appraisals. This would be SU dozer with tilt, because I bet you there's a tilt cylinder on the other side of this blade that allows you to go like that. With tilt, cab, ripper, and then undercarriage percentage, which we'll get into next. This is a U dozer. See, instead of having it angle right toward the end, it angles a lot closer to the middle, and that's for big dozers because you're hogging big dirt that way. This is an angle dozer. See, this frame right here is actually a C-frame that goes around the tractor and pins on both sides, same as that tractor, it pins on the roller frames. But the lift cylinders attached to this C-frame. And this blade is the angle dozer that hooks onto it. You see these little eyelets here, they're actually kind of big eyelets, has multi-positions so that you can pin the blade manually at an angle or a sharper angle or straight, and mostly used in pipeline applications. So imagine going down the right-of-way and the excavators digging the trench. They're setting the dirt along the side. Once that trench is then padded, pipe laid, and when you go to backfill, you can take this angle dozer and all the way down, and you're backfilling all that dirt very easily and fast. Those are angle dozers. You don't see them as much because they're not a production. It's more of an application. This is called a six-way dozer. You see these on most all the smaller to maybe medium-sized dozers. And Balderson was the first one to come out with it back in the early 80s, and they called it a PAT blade, which I thought was a lot better than a six-way dozer, but power angle tilt. So basically why it's a six-way dozer, it'll go up and down, it'll go side to side, and it'll angle that way. It's a finished dozer so that you can really grade dirt a lot better, and you'll see these in a lot of the smaller tractors, but that's a six-way. Here you might not see as many of these unless you're on a big dirt job with big scrapers. That's called a C dozer or a cushion dozer. And what that's designed, you'll notice it has an inside mount for the arms, and it's just designed to push scrapers and push things. This isn't really a dirt mover. It's to push. Out west, you got big scrapers, a lot bigger scrapers, and here you might see a 631 here, and that's a small one out west. They do big work out there. So that's a type of dozers, but that's what you got there. I went into this. It's more of a reference. Undercarriages are important because they have to do, like on that D6, if I was going to completely do the undercarriage on it, it would be a $22,000 bill. If I just wanted to do the chains, it might be $9,000 to $10,000. But we'll talk about a little bit about the wear, but there's basically, I listed 7 components, but there's basically 6 I look at, and we train the guys to appraise. If you really wanted to get exact on an undercarriage, you probably won't, but you need to know generally if it's worn out or if it's okay. That's the way, from our purposes, that's probably all you need. But this is a high dollar wear item. When you break it down, the links is that link right there. They call that a link. like a chain. The bushings is this little bushing here for which this pin fits into, and this goes inside the link, and they all tie together, and that's how it makes the chain. The idler is basically an idler wheel. If that's the drive wheel and that's the drive wheel, this is the idler. It doesn't power turn, it just guides the track around. And anything called idler is just assisting. Rollers, you got the track rollers, which are basically supporting the middle of the machine. These, interesting enough, are double flange or single flange, and we won't get into all that, but every other one is a double flange, single flange, double flange, single flange. But these are the track rollers, and that's a carrier roller because it just suspends the track between two major points here. Those are carrier rollers. So the segments, I call them segments now. It used to be called sprockets or segments, either way. That's what drives this track. In the old days, there were one big piece and they were pretty expensive, but nowadays you just see bolt-on segments, so it's a lot cheaper. It's probably the cheapest thing on this undercarriage. For a D4, you might spend $350 a side in parts just to change out the segments as they wear out. So when you're feeling of it, when you're checking out an undercarriage, what I'm looking at mostly, and I'll show some examples of wear in a minute, but it's this link, the outside of this bushing, sprockets, but like I say, they're not very expensive. Rollers are expensive, but it's amazing how many people just don't look at rollers. So if they don't value it, I'm not going to value it either. But it can get expensive.
What about the wear of the track? I've seen some that look really bad.
Oh, that's a beautiful segue. That's right where we're at. The wear on the links. For example, this is a set of, just the language a mechanic may use with you too. Links. Link is really that one link. Chains is the assembly of the links, pin, and bushing, which is the whole set of this. So you got link, bushing, pin in the middle. So that whole assembly is called chains. You can also have track groups, which is really just add the pads that are bolted onto the link on top of it, and you got a track group. But where you see the wear is right here. See where that lateral line is kind of rusty? And I picked this picture because that steel is super hardened, and it's a wear surface, and you can get a lot of life. You're getting out west where you don't have any abrasive like sand. You get down here, you might get 1,500, 1,800 hours out of your bushings, pins and bushings, and maybe even your links if you're running a lot of sand. You get out west or in big country where there's just not abrasives, you get a lot more hours out of them than that. But this has got a lot of link wear material. So this is and you can tell by these sprockets, these get sharp. As this drives that pin and bushing around and drives the track around, that gets ground down. And in fact, these get sharp, and that's you know the segments are worn out when they're sharp because they're not doing such a good job. There's probably the wear on these pins when that's happening too. So that's a good one. This is a bad one. Oddly enough, I was out by the auction. There was an auction last week, and on my way up here, I swung in to drive through the yard to get a picture of a worn-out links for you, and I couldn't even find one. So I guess the equipment's getting better than when I was doing it. But this is a pretty bad link. It's actually worn on the side, which is wearing on the sides of the roller, so you can't really see it so much. But see the pin boss here, pin boss there, all that is worn through because you can't even see the tip of it like you can see this tip. And these tips vary. There's different kinds, so you can't solely go by that, but that's worn out.
So if someone says it's 60% undercarriage.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to that if you would, how they're referring to which components or the overall undercarriage. You got 60% undercarriage.
Lots of latitude, and no one can contest them. Because unless you got out, unless the dealer will probably have the tools, and he gets the micrometers out and measures because he knows what the starting point measurement would have been, and now where it's at, only the dealer with those tools could really give you exact measurements. And technically, you can't do that. Undercarriage is 60% is a generality because of all 7 components are going to have varying degrees of wear.
So how would you grade that guy on the right over there?
On that guy on the right, I'd probably call him 10 to 20%. And nobody could question me on it. They just say, yeah, it's pretty worn. That's what you think of.
So here's.
And I'd say that's 70 to 80 just because it's got some wear, but you're probably, it's the higher end of the range, right?
Speaking to John's specific question, I'm thinking in terms of liability, in terms of what I put on there versus what the owner has told me it is. That way the liability chases the owner. Not
Yeah.
me.
If the owner's there and the owner knows, but if you're dealing with a yard guy that's
Well,
only
the yard
been working
guy,
there for a week,
yeah.
he might not know.
You know what? It's a good point. For the report, I would not include it at all. I wouldn't put the percentage. I would not put the percentage in there. I'd put it in my notes because as I'm researching, a lot of times and the best places I've come to find actual transactions, and I think I said at the beginning, these really big, well-attended auctions are truly now OLV. They're not forced liquidated value because of the type of buyers that they have. But you can almost look at those pictures and see variances. You can see examples of similar make, model, series of type machines in the vintage you're looking at. And if you know yours is way down because your notes say it, you're going to take a little less on that. You might deduct $5,000 off of what the price of that machine is because somebody's going to have to put 5 or 10 in it when they go.
I'm all for not mentioning the condition, but
What if you got to
picture a divorce situation where the husband knows that condition is 15%, and if you don't address it and
He's gonna nail you.
yeah, he'll nail you in court.
Ah.
But would you,
How do you
at
avoid
that
that?
point, just move out to overall condition at good or fair?
That's such a big part of it, Nathan.
And just leave it at good, which is 95% of equipment out there.
How would you address that, Tom?
Thompson equipment.
We have a different scope because we're about to lay our money out on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a story about that. I evaluated a John Deere 450E a few years back. It was 1982 for an older gentleman. It was like his retirement machine. The John Deere dealership just talked him into putting a new undercarriage on it. It had about a 40%. John Deere said, put this undercarriage on, it's going to bring the value up. The value of that machine before the undercarriage in my mind was 11.5. He put 10,000, a little over 11,000 with the John Deere dealership.
13.5?
14.5.
14.5.
I mean, so
It didn't have carry.
so it just, there was no real value. He would have been better off selling it with that older undercarriage. So I don't.
Especially if it had any life.
Well, that's the theory
Right.
of contribution,
Mhm.
what that is. But it does pose a problem if you get into a potential lawsuit or something where someone says it's worth this and the other party says no, it's worth this, and we get on the witness stand. And you kind of want to look like, you don't want to look like an idiot.
No, but you also, I think in a little bit there, it's less is more. When you're on that witness stand, I would
But
call
you do
that
have to
good
put a
machine
condition
leave
though,
it
right?
As is, you know.
Yeah. You do have to put a condition though, you're right. Just
I can put it at good. That thing's
yeah,
up
I
there.
put it in my notes. I put it in my notes though, just for my research of values. I know, okay, this one's rough.
Because your notes are exposable in court.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I haven't been in court, so.
Not if you leave them at home.
You better purge it before discovery, let me just tell you that.
Purge!
Grab that shredder.
All right, so and on this wear, like I say, sprockets get sharp. This disappears. That wear item. These are getting sharp. That they get actually sharper than that when they're completely worn out. But you'll see people reach under and feel. They won't even get under there and look so much, but they come over here and feel underneath that chain, because I'm picturing from up underneath this chain right here, looking, and you can see how the pin wears from the sprocket. grinding on it, right? So you can see some wear there. I'd say that's probably 60%. I got a little different where I'm coming from on there because when that thing wears through, I just change out the chains.
Draw what a wear pattern would look like. If I was looking at it from the side, what I would be feeling.
It'd be flat. It'll be
One
flat.
side would be flat,
It's a round
so
pin.
it almost feel like a D.
Yeah, people call it pins and bushings, but it's truly all the bushing. The bushing's the only thing you're really feeling. And what you're doing is this round bushing. So you're feeling this area right there.
And if it's
And-
flat.
Yeah,
that's
you'll
more.
feel that it's flat on the bottom side. Or sometimes it might even be worn on the top side too, and I'll tell you why, because on larger tracks, the undercarriages are more expensive. So if I get a lot of wear on the bottom side of this bushing from that sprocket turning it, you can unpin the tracks, take it into a track shop. They can press out, hydraulically press out these pins and bushings, turn the bushing, and reinsert them, so then you start wearing on the other half of the bushing. So you could actually feel wear on the top, which I would do on a big tractor because it's expensive. On little ones, it's not worth the money to do it, so throw them away, put on new chains.
Real quick about the difference in a grouser track versus non.
Yes, and I don't think I've got any examples. For example, this is a single bar grouser track pad. And that's what digs in and moves the tractor. You can also have, and you see it on a lot of crawler loaders, double bar grouser. It's 2 bars, not quite as tall. On an excavator, most of them are triple bar grousers. And the bar is just the vertical point here with it that's grabbing the dirt to move the tractor. That's what grouser is. Now you can also have, there's also low ground pressure, or LGP tracks, or LPGP pads, which basically it's a wider pad, so it's lower lower pressure per square inch, pounds per square inch on the ground, and you can get into sloppier ground better because it floats better because it's a wider pad. And in fact, down here, for some of the first ones, you might see what's called a pyramid pad or self-cleaning pad, where that pad is kind of weird looking. It'll stand out to you pretty good. It is so what it is the dirt gets packed into here, and then when it turns, it falls out. And that's for really swampy conditions, and they call them swamp pads or self-cleaning pads or apex pads. You know, there's slang for it, but that's a different kind of pad, and it doesn't have the bar at all. It's for sloppy ground. Okay, spent a lot of time on this because
So the far right or the bottom, how would you rate that?
I'd say that, well, I can't see the whole thing, but if I were just looking at that and said the rest of it, probably the pads are down too, I might call in my own notes 10 to 20%. So I'm thinking, in my mindset when I'm going through the pricing and looking at comparables, I'm thinking the lower end, right?
How much for the condition in the report? Would you just rate it as fair?
Well, in the report as we were talking, I wouldn't put a percentage.
Yeah. No, I would say because the problem is you could have had a brand new rebuilt engine, which at that point you're balancing. So.
And
If you've got a tractor like that, a small one, it may not be like full production unit. They may be using it occasionally, and then it's got a lot of life left in it.
Yeah. And one thing about used equipment, like we always said in the auction business, it'll never always go all internet, because there's varying degrees of wear from the front to the back of that machine. And you can't say a machine is good or undercarriage is 60%, because it's varying degrees all the way through it. And that's why people like to put their eyes on it and see it. They might bid online, but a lot of times they've gone to look at it or had somebody look at it, and then they bid on it. But anyway, that's just auction. We're supposed to be talking about appraisals here. Undercarriage for excavators is different, how I measure them. That's crawlers, this is excavators. And because the track is so long, maybe you got 27 or 29 length here. before it gets all that wear on that pin and bush, that bushing, so to speak, or the links, this is a normal swag you're supposed to have. That's a manufacturer's, actually it's measured specifically between that point, if it were straight, to there, and they say this is the ideal wear swag you would have for optimum operating condition. So say it's got normal swag in this, you look at this one, I go to the other side of the machine, I go to the idler side. Because how you adjust these out as you get wear, where you mostly get the wear is between that pin and that bushing. 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, just a little bit, but times all those links that you see them, and they call it stretched. That undercarriage is stretched because it's wear between that pin and the bushing. So you have to get the right swag, you have to start moving the idler out that comes out inside the roller frame. So they pump it out with like a grease gun, and it's a track adjuster system, and it pushes that idler out. Well, this one is hanging out the end and about to fall off. So you know this undercarriage is 10% or less. It's shot, because if he's got normal swag, and he has a little there, I can see, this chain group is worn out. And they will always just replace the chains. They'll cut these, there's 4 bolts hold each pad on. This is a triple grouser, see the 3 on every one. Well, they'll just cut the 4 bolts off, take the pads off, replace the chains, put new bolt and nut on the track pads, and bolt them to the link.
You say this is hanging off the end here.
Right here. This slides in and out of this is called the roller frame,
Right.
but this whole section is on a channel where this pillow block rides. So it goes in. It's supposed to be back here. It shouldn't be out at all. It should be inside of here. See this little hole? Probably when it's new, it's at the front of that hole. So this has been adjusted so far out, it is shot. So that might not look like it. And then on the other hand, you can look at this one. You say, boy, this one looks shot. But if you look closely, they don't have it adjusted correctly. And this idler is way back in here. So it's not adjusted out properly, and that's why it all looks so. So what that'd tell me, maybe not the undercarriage isn't shot, it's the track adjuster's broken or something. The mechanism when you're pumping it up with grease to move that idler out. But that chain might probably be okay, because that idler, I can't see the pillow block, but I can see the round part there. That's way inside the roller frame. I know that isn't worn out. It's just not adjusted. Anyway, we're probably getting too much into detail because I got a rip here. When Dan shows up, you know you're going too slow. Excavators. Bucket. The bucket width you measure. The stick from this point where it pins on to where it pins on to the boom is the measurement of length of stick. There's all kind of options of short, medium, longer medium, long sticks. So we usually get that length. This is an a set of auxiliary hydraulics. As you look at, I had a picture somewhere, maybe it's coming up. When you have auxiliary hydraulics, it's 2 circuits. If you did farm tractors, whatever, you'll have 2 ports for hydraulics, right? Well, one's supply and one's return. So that's 1 circuit to power a cylinder somewhere. So this has auxiliary hydraulics, as you can see from the piping here. This happens to have a work tool group, but that's a whole nother story. These are pretty high dollar, and they're pretty much standard on newer machines now, but it's about a $20,000 ad on a Caterpillar work tool group, because this was so special. I don't know how the heck they got to 20,000, but it really was. But it's more, you're not going to see that as much. You're going to see auxiliary hydraulics. And I put an aux hide on those. It might have a thumb, a fixed thumb, or a hydraulic cylinder that operates a thumb. So you just call it a hydraulic thumb or thumb. Here's a long reach. I picked this picture because it's a long reach and it's amphibious. Wilco down over in Louisiana, they probably one of the first to make the pontoon tracks or amphibious carriers. They're basically big pontoons with big wide tracks that let you go into the swamp and muck out stuff. These are mobile excavators. Almost all of them will have a leveling blade, bucket width, stick length, auxiliary hydraulics. And here's another example, Volvo and that. Mini excavators. Don't get caught in the semantics on what the heck a mini excavator is. 12,000 or 14,000 pound. In Europe, they've got it broken down to 13 metric ton to 18 as a midi or something. They want to go midi, who cares? It's an excavator, it's a mini excavator. You list the exact same things. You got to be careful about cab and canopy. Like I just got one delivered to me from the bank, and he had me give a desktop on it before I, not a desktop, it's really just an opinion. He says, what's the range on what this thing's worth? What information did he have? It's a 2015 Takeuchi TB153 mini excavator. It's got a cab and about 1,500 hours. You can look around, well, might be up to 40 or 50,000 for this, maybe 35 to 45,000 dollars. I tell him. Well, it rolls in. It's got 1,600 hours, and yes, it has a glass on the right side where you're going over to the boom by here. This side has a little glass there. It's not a cab, you know, unless it has a door or hinges for a door and seals it for air because you might be working in dusty application. It's not a cab. Yeah, and they'll have it in here too. You can look at whether it has heat or AC, and you're right, I didn't list it. Good point. I am now stuck. Oh, thank you. Forklifts, you all know what a forklift is. Here just shows what the stuff is. Side shift shifts the whole carriage. Fork positioners moves each individual fork. You want to list lift height. It's important. And from my perspective, it has value. From the appraising standpoint, it probably doesn't have as much value, but I'm also looking to resell it when I'm getting it in, right? So all these things are important to resell. But if you're going to lift it, lift the lift height. It'll always be on the tag of the machine, or if it's not, I don't list it. Type of engine, here's an LP tank, so you know it's LP gas, or diesel or whatever. Here is, that's a forklift, that's a forklift. This is a heavy duty forklift. Time for shameless plug. It's a 2012 with 2,100 hours with 8-foot forks, fork positioners, side shift, 157-inch lift height, cab, and Cummins engine. Good tires. I'd prefer to get 85,000 for it, but I'll take 75. But actually, I got sold just before I come here, so it's a wasted shameless plug. It's going to Trinidad. Just left the yard. This is a rough terrain. You see just a lot of these on most construction sites. Some guys call them farm tractor forklift. It's a rough terrain. What's important, 4x4 or not 4x4? That is very important. It could be $5,000 in the difference. You'll find that when you're researching values. Probably $5,000 in the difference. Cabs are significant in difference, but some things are different. A loader backhoe might have has a canopy or a cab. Down here in the south, the difference might only be, what would you say, $7,000-8,000? If that. You get up north, it might be 15,000 to 18,000 new, but up north they won't have a canopy, right? So they might put a $12,000 to $15,000 premium on the cab versus canopy. So that's why it is significant. Anyway, same stuff. I list on the rough terrains how many. If you have the lift height, a lot of times you can't find the lift height. I just say how many stages. It's a 2 or 3 stage mast if I can't find the lift height. And you'll see the stages that it will lift up. Whether it has side shift or not, and 4x4 cab engine. Telescopic forklift or telehandler forklift, same thing. Everybody will know what you're talking about. Same stuff, except on this, you can get a tilt carriage. It'll have a little cylinder on the side, goes up and down so you can tilt the carriage. This looks like a cab. It's not a cab. It doesn't have a ceiling door. That's the that's a design designation for cab. Now I got to rip because. Okay, next. Landscape loader, or in the West, a skip loader. That's the only place they call it that, so I don't know why the industry wants to call it a skip loader just because Californians and Arizonans want to call it a skip loader. But that's a landscape loader. GP, or 4-in-1 bucket, cab or canopy. This is called the box blade. No reason to lift a hydraulic lift because it will always have it. But that is a PTO shaft. And if it's got a PTO on most tractors, list it because it's probably an option that would drive some other function that you might want to hook onto it. This is a good picture of auxiliary hydraulics. That's one circuit. I call it auxiliary hydraulic. You could have another shameless plug. I do have this one. It's a 2015 with 600 hours, 4-in-1 bucket, cab, extend-a-hoe, which is kind of, it'll the stick will hydraulically extend, 4-wheel drive, completely loaded, 600 hours, 80 grand right now. Yes, sir. Yours, I will. Okay. I'm the hoe. No, e-stick, extend. Well, it's the same thing. Yeah. He's right, and everybody, no one will question you. Extend a hoe, e-stick, it's generic pretty much. These are motor graders. A lot to talk about motor graders, and I'm just about out of time. So this is there's options you can have: a push block, a V-plow, which I don't have a picture of, but a big V-plow on the front of these for a snow wing that you see mostly out west, which is great big blade extension, might add 4 or 5 grand. Blade length is important. Accumulators are these little canisters right here. It's like a shock absorber for the blade when you're hitting a rock or a pipe or something. It'll absorb it better. That's good. A ripper. You can see it back there. A ripper, a scarifier. Lots of significant things on a motor grader, even down to engine. Like these 140s are the most popular motor grader there is, but the first ones came out with C13s. They were weak. You'll see a big difference if it has a C13 engine or a C15 engine. Now they're powered up, and coincidentally, C13s are bad in trucks too. It kills the value of a truck tractor. Here's a picture of your grade and slope control pods. You're going to have some electronics in the cab. You'll have these, and somewhere in a computer you'll be on a system because it's taking GPS where they can get the exact grade. That's an expensive option. So when you have that, and you'll see it, depending on what it is, there's different generations and all that, so it's going to vary from just about next to nothing to maybe 10 grand. Wouldn't you say, Tom, if you have them out there? 10,000. Type of scrapers. This is a scraper. This is a push-pull. You'll notice this has twin engine. So there's really only, well, that's a twin engine. That is a push-pull attachment. So it has a cushion here so it can push the scraper in the back, and it has this bail that comes down and gets on a hook that's on the back of the other machine, and they run in tandem, and that's called a push-pull because they can actually go either way. This is an elevating scraper. You see it's got a little elevator here, probably about 6-7 foot wide, and it just throws the dirt up into the back of these, and they'll be about 13 or 15 yard thing. Bowl there. Push-pull, that is not push-pull, but pull scraper. I put push-pull attachments for that, but this is a pull scraper. Reynolds, there's a bunch of manufacturers of these. You'll find comps on those. Next. Pipe layers. Crawler pipe layer, there's all kinds. Most of them do not, or never used to have cabs canopies. Canadian operators have been pushing that for safety on ROPS now. It's actually starting to spread in the U.S. You're going to see more and more of them with cabs and canopies and rollover protective structures. That's how they work. They just sit there and hang over. But here's an old one. It's all clutches and brakes, and you better know what you're doing when you get up there and do that, because you could drop that boom in a free fall. But now most of them are moving to hydraulic controls, which makes sense, hydraulic winches, right? Here's a combination pipe layer. Also has a dozer, and what they did was stuck a side boom on the side of it, and that's a folding one, so it folds up. And then hydraulic drawworks attached to the back here, so they can operate it and throw it on a tractor. You can even get them on rubber tire pipe layer. You can stick one on the side of a wheel loader or a backhoe or a farm tractor. Next. Skid steers and multi-terrain loaders. A multi-terrain loader is really a track skid steer. And now they've just gone to basically calling them multi-terrain. You can have a multitude of attachments on these fronts, so you just list what they have, whether they have the auxiliary hydraulic, probably down the arm to run whatever else attachment that you have. If you got a multi-cylinder attachment on the front, a breaker or something, there's a 401 bucket cab. You can even have a backhoe mount on one. But that's a multi-terrain, that's a skid steer. Two-speed is important. Two-speed hydraulics. Some folks are looking for that because it cranks up the pressure to be able to run some of those higher pressure attachments. So if you see two-speed on the side, I can't tell if it's got two-speed. I really can't, unless it's got the decal that tells me it's two-speed on the side. Some guys can, but I'm not a mechanic. I could never tell. Well, they're like almost like a quick couple, but everybody makes the brackets so they'll fit on the front of those. So there is, what would you say? There's probably 15 different types of attachments you can get on a skid steer. They're all pretty universal. Scrap handling, tough application. Here's a material handler. See, it's a boom stick, a little curve on the end. That's a material handler that you usually put a magnet on, or an orange peel grapple, or some other kind of grapple. They have these have hydraulic elevating cabs. This one's just an elevated cab. That's hydraulic elevating cab because it folds. That's what you list on them. Sometimes they'll have a generator on the side that you power for the magnet. Here's a excavator shear. I've got this one. It's a 2006 with only 6,500 hours and a rebuilt shear. But you'll notice this has a fixed. This is just a regular Labounty shear. Here's a Labounty shear. This is called a rotator, more used for demolition. So when you're reaching up, you can get over this way, squeeze off an I-beam and cut it. It's more flexibility. Most of the scrap yards on the yards like these because it's just less hydraulics to leak. Next. Crawler trenchers. You can read it, rock saw, crawler trencher. Bucket trencher, it's just really a wheel with a bunch of buckets on it. You don't see too many of those except in the pipeline left over for them. Four-wheel drive trenchers, walk behind trenchers. Next. Wheel loaders with that's a spade nose bucket. That's of GP or light material. I can't tell from the picture if it's blown up, but a light material bucket would be unusually large because you can lift more stuff. These are integrated tool carriers. You notice the difference between getting breakout force on a bucket, and these are more to handle forks or bucket or whatever you want to stick on the front. Can't designate it as integrated tool carrier, and a couple others followed suit, but that's what that is. But it'll say it on it. I almost made it in time. Is there any questions at all? Because I ripped through it and
Guys, a suggestion.
Please help me.
Run across a piece of equipment you don't know, YouTube it in action, and I'll tell you what, that'll answer a lot of questions. I've done that before on stuff I've never seen, which isn't too much now, but.
Yeah. So it's not rocket science, but there's a lot to know about it. But the way I put jammed so much information on that when Dan or Larry puts that up on the website, and you get a construction appraisal, just download that and it'll list out a lot of the stuff that you can include and look at, and then it adds your credibility to not only the banker but the banker's customer you're talking to right there, because he knows something about construction equipment, as opposed to your competition, which just put the make and serial number, and he didn't think he knew crap, so he's really throwing doubt on the bank's appraisal, which is your appraisal, which makes the bank look bad. So you list all this stuff, you got credibility, which makes your customer happy.